Hey folks, it's been a while. Hope you're doing well. A very different sort of video from my usual fare here today. A little bit of a rant to tide you over while I work on a much bigger project. Okay. The other month, I watched the 2014 movie Whiplash at a 10th anniversary screening here in Boston, and I have some thoughts. I left the theater somewhat in awe of the movie, particularly its gorgeous cinematography and well-paced final sequence, but also absolutely furious with it. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, in my opinion, Whiplash has one of the most evil messages of any film that I've seen made in the 21st century. While aspects of it seem to try to be a love letter to jazz, I think that in the end, it spits in the face of the entire genre and its practitioners. To me, this is a real problem, as the film's popularity has implanted its twisted ideology into an entire generation of people whenever they think of music education. So, I figured I'd talk about it. For anyone who's seen Whiplash, especially folks who like it, let me explain why I feel this way. Mild spoilers ahead, just so you know, and also this video probably won't make sense unless you've seen the movie before. Anyway, now I've seen some fans of this movie complain that jazz musicians are often too obsessed with picking apart its unrealistic portrayal of jazz to properly appreciate it as a film. As a musician who has been through his fair share of jazz combo gigs, I think these complaints wildly miss the point that musical critics are trying to make. My problem with Whiplash is not that it gets jazz wrong. Not that no one seems to know what Donna Lee sounds like, or that if you know how to play the drums at all, your hands probably shouldn't be gushing blood after every long practice session. That's much more of an upright bass thing. Dramatic license is fine and expected in nearly every movie to some degree. The real issue at hand, I think, is much worse. Whiplash completely misunderstands the nature of success and greatness, and the alternative perspective it pushes on viewers about these things is actively harmful. I've read that writer-director Damien Chazelle was inspired to make this film after having a band director who was way too harsh with students while attending high school in New Jersey. And yeah, his unresolved bitterness toward that experience really comes through. It just goes to show you that men really will create an entire Academy Award-winning movie just to avoid going to therapy. Now, Whiplash is not without its merits as a movie. It is beautifully shot and edited, and even more beautifully acted. But it sympathizes way too much with antagonist band director Fletcher's philosophy to present a serious portrait of toxic and abusive relationships to the viewer. The fatal flaw, and my argument to people who say that the message is okay because Fletcher is portrayed as unlikable, is that no one firmly pushing back on Fletcher's ideas is a musician, and so their arguments can easily be dismissed as not understanding the sacrifice that greatness requires. Chazelle does not lend any opposing views a credible advocate, and so the idea that jazz is dying because people aren't mean enough to each other anymore is taken at face value. We're left uncomfortable maybe with Fletcher's idea about the two most harmful words in the English language being good job, my second least favorite movie quote after Love Story's infamous love means never having to say you're sorry. But no alternative is presented. No example given of a great artist who wasn't a complete jerk or wasn't made great through abuse. This is particularly silly to me because the very best musicians I know tend to be some of the kindest and most well-adjusted people in my life. The conservatory in the film is portrayed as a completely dog-eat-dog world where success is only possible through utter self-annihilation in pursuit of practice, with no substantive pushback from a single character. This means that we as viewers are given only two possible interpretations of the ending while exiting the theater. Either it was happy because Fletcher finally pushed protagonist Neiman far enough that he became one of the greats, or it was sad because Neiman lost his humanity in the process. A better interpretation might be that the ending is an absolute tragedy. Neiman would always have been capable of greatness if taught well, but Fletcher's approach condemns him to self-destruction alongside greatness, and in doing so hands down the cycle of abuse and trauma to yet another generation. Without external knowledge of healthy music education, though, the viewer is not given the opportunity to form this third viewpoint. The film presents a completely false dichotomy between misery in pursuit of greatness and contentment in mediocrity, and dishonestly demands that its audience choose one of the two. It's not that the problems it illustrates in music education don't exist in real life. Far from it. But it kind of just throws all those problems at you and says, well, tough. This is the way it is, and this is the way it always will be. And gotta say, I really disagree with that. I find it very telling that Whiplash seems to mostly idolize Buddy Rich, alongside a fishy anecdote repeatedly trotted out about the origin of Charlie Parker's virtuosity, perhaps to shore the movie up against criticisms that it mainly idolizes white jazz. Don't get me wrong. Buddy Rich was a great drummer, but he is also well documented to have been conceited, small-minded about music, and occasionally an absolute nightmare of a human being to work with. His legacy as a technician on his instrument and a great performer and studio artist lives on, but he did very little to move the genre of jazz forward in the way that someone like Charlie Parker did, and his compositions have left little impact on society. Jazz musicians, level with me here. Seriously, when is the last time that someone called a Buddy Rich tune at a jam session? Can anyone watching this who is not specifically a jazz drummer recall how a single Buddy Rich standard goes? I'll wait. I'd argue that jazz as an art form came about primarily because of its players' minds, not just their chops. But those who idolize Rich and people like him tend to focus way more on the latter than the former. I'd posit that if jazz is really dying, as it's portrayed to be in this film, it's because of a far too pervasive focus on virtuosity over creativity, a blind worship of key artists of the past, including aspects of their personalities that had absolutely nothing to do with music, and a hesitancy to challenge a pedagogical status quo obsessed with hierarchy and perfection. Keen viewers will note that all these issues are illustrated through Fletcher's actions and attitudes throughout the film without any hesitancy or regret. Now, any serious researcher studying the science of motivation, especially as it relates to education, will tell you without pause that scaring and shaming kids into learning and persevering will cause far more harm than good to society in the long run. Any decent teacher should agree too. For each genius that you think you make, there will be perhaps 100 that you break. In much of the world, we have moved past these archaic models of learning decades ago in most subjects. Why then do we still accept them in the arts? What do we think is so unique about music, for example, that makes it so that we can only learn from abusive, emotionally stunted psychopaths? These are real questions that still deserve serious analysis and discussion today. But if you're looking for any of that from Whiplash, you will walk away sorely disappointed after the spectacle of the final song fades out. Now, I focused almost totally on the negatives about this movie here, largely because others have done a much better job than I could ever do illustrating the positives. But to drive the point home that the movie is not just black and white, here is a rundown of the positive aspects that I do see. Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons are consistently raw and realistic as their characters and do a great job livening up the at times rather misanthropic script. Chazelle's direction, too, is better than his writing. The shots throughout are set up, sequenced, and executed flawlessly, especially in the final performance of Caravan. The tension, too, is built and released masterfully throughout. Overall, it's not that you shouldn't give this movie a watch. It's got some amazing performances and has a decent soundtrack. Just please, for the love of God, if you watch it, don't accept its message uncritically, because I feel strongly that both factually and morally, it's as wrong as wrong can be. Okay, anyway, that's my take on Whiplash. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully something new and very different from this coming not too far from now. See you all next time.